Imagine a world where justice was delivered not in a courtroom but in a dark, stone-walled dungeon, where the screams of the accused echoed through torch-lit corridors. What if I told you that the medieval methods of extracting confessions were so brutal, so ingeniously cruel, that they'd make your skin crawl? Have you ever wondered how far people in the Middle Ages went to enforce what they called justice? Stay with me, because today we're diving into the shocking, often horrifying world of medieval torture methods, practices that shaped the justice system of Europe for centuries. By the end of this video, you'll uncover the truth behind these devices, the psychology of punishment, and why these methods left a lasting mark on history. Let's step into the shadows and explore a side of the Middle Ages you won't find in fairy tales. The Middle Ages, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, were a time when Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, fiefdoms, and city-states, each with its own version of law and order. Justice wasn't about rehabilitation or fairness as we know it today. It was about control, fear, and often spectacle. The church, the crown, and local lords held immense power, and they used punishment to maintain it. Torture wasn't just a tool for extracting confessions. It was a public statement, a warning to anyone who dared step out of line. But why was torture so central to medieval justice? To understand that, we need to look at the mindset of the time. People believed in divine judgment, where God would reveal the truth through trials or confessions. If you were accused of a crime, whether theft, heresy, or treason, your guilt or innocence might be tested in ways that seem unthinkable today. Let's start with one of the most infamous torture devices, the rack. Picture a wooden frame about the size of a table, with ropes and pulleys at each end. The victim was tied by their wrists and ankles, and as the executioner turned the crank, the ropes tightened, stretching the body inch by agonizing inch. Joints popped, ligaments tore, and bones sometimes snapped. The rack was used across Europe, from England to Spain, and was especially popular during the Inquisition. Why was it so effective? It didn't just cause pain. It played on the fear of permanent disfigurement. A person might survive the rack, but they'd never walk the same again. Historical records from the 14th century describe prisoners begging for mercy, offering confessions, true or false, just to stop the stretching. The rack wasn't about truth. It was about breaking the will. But the rack was just the beginning. Another device that sent chills through medieval Europe was the Judas Cradle. This was a pyramid-shaped wooden seat, sharp at the top, where the victim was forced to sit with their full body weight pressing down. Ropes or weights ensured they couldn't lift themselves off. The pain was excruciating, and the humiliation was deliberate. Used primarily in southern Europe, especially during the Spanish Inquisition, the Judas Cradle was reserved for those accused of heresy or witchcraft. What's chilling is how calculated it was. The torturers could adjust the pressure, prolonging the suffering for hours or even days. A 15th century account from Seville describes a woman accused of witchcraft enduring the cradle for 2 days before confessing to crimes she likely didn't commit. The device wasn't just about pain. It was about stripping away dignity, making the victim feel utterly powerless. Now let's talk about something even more gruesome, the breaking wheel. This wasn't just a torture device. It was a public spectacle. The victim was tied to a large wooden wheel, and the executioner would use an iron bar to smash their limbs, breaking bones one by one. The wheel was then hoisted into the air, leaving the mangled body on display for days. This method was common in France and Germany, especially for crimes like murder or rebellion. The 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris describes a thief in Paris who was broken on the wheel, his cries drawing crowds who watched in a mix of horror and fascination. The breaking wheel wasn't just punishment. It was theater, designed to terrify the public into obedience. Can you imagine standing in a medieval town square, watching this unfold, knowing that any misstep could put you on that wheel? What's striking about these methods is how they varied across Europe. In England, for instance, torture was less common in legal proceedings due to the reliance on trial by jury, but when it was used, it was brutal. Take the peine forte et dure, or strong and hard punishment. If you refused to plead guilty or not guilty, you'd be pressed under heavy stones until you either spoke or died. In 1586, a woman named Margaret Clitheroe was crushed to death in York for refusing to enter a plea on charges of harboring Catholic priests. Her death was slow, public, and meant to send a message. Meanwhile, in the Holy Roman Empire, torture was a go-to method. Victims were forced to drink gallons of water, their stomachs swelling until they confessed or burst. A 14th-century German trial record notes a man enduring this for hours, confessing to theft just to end the torment. These regional differences show how torture was tailored to local cultures, but the goal was always the same: control through fear. Let's pause for a moment and consider the psychology behind this. Why did medieval societies rely on such extreme measures? Part of it was practical. Without modern forensics, confessions were often the only way to prove guilt. But it went deeper. The Middle Ages were steeped in a worldview where sin and crime were intertwined. To be a criminal was to offend God, and torture was seen as a way to purify the soul or expose the truth. The Church played a huge role here. During the Inquisition, which began in the 12th century, torture was formalized as a tool to root out heresy. Pope Innocent IV's 1252 bull, Ad Extirpanda, explicitly allowed torture for heretics, arguing it was justified to save souls. This gave torturers a moral excuse, turning cruelty into a holy act. It's hard to imagine now, but to a medieval priest, the screams of a heretic might have sounded like the path to salvation. But not everyone was on board. Some voices, even in the Middle Ages, questioned the morality of torture. The 12th century jurist Gratian argued that confessions extracted under duress were unreliable, a view echoed by a few secular courts. In England, the Magna Carta of 1215 indirectly limited torture by emphasizing lawful judgment, though it didn't ban it outright. These early critiques planted seeds for later reforms, but they were drowned out by the dominant belief that pain revealed truth. It's a stark reminder of how cultural norms can justify practices we now see as barbaric. If you were a medieval peasant, would you have questioned the system, or would you have accepted it as justice? Let's shift to another chilling method, the Iron Maiden. Though its use in the Middle Ages is debated, the concept, a coffin lined with spikes that pierced the victim as it closed, captured the imagination of later historians. While some argue it was a 19th century exaggeration, there's evidence of similar devices in medieval Germany and Italy. A 14th century Italian chronicle mentions a spiked box used on a traitor, though details are scarce. Whether real or myth, the Iron Maiden symbolizes the era's obsession with pain as punishment. Its spikes weren't just about killing, they were about prolonging suffering, making the victim's final moments a public lesson. The idea of being trapped in a metal tomb, unable to move without impaling yourself, is the stuff of nightmares. Another method that turned stomachs was flaying, or skinning alive. This was rare but reserved for the worst crimes like treason. In 1306, the Scottish rebel William Wallace was partially flayed after his capture by the English, his skin displayed as a warning to others. Flaying was less about confession and more about deterrence. The process was slow, deliberate, and meant to maximize suffering. A chronicler of the time described the crowd's silence as Wallace's skin was peeled away, a mix of awe and terror gripping the onlookers. It's hard to fathom the mindset of an executioner who could carry out such an act. But in the medieval world, this was justice. Let's explore the role of public participation. Torture wasn't just for the accused, it was for the audience. Town squares became stages where communities gathered to witness justice. In 14th century London, executions and tortures drew thousands, from nobles to peasants. The crowd wasn't just passive. They cheered, jeered, or sometimes threw stones. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a communal act, reinforcing the social order. If you saw a thief's hand cut off, you'd think twice before stealing. The spectacle also served a religious purpose. Public suffering was seen as a chance for the condemned to repent, their pain a step toward redemption. A 15th century French sermon praised public executions as mirrors of mortality, reminding everyone of their own sins. But what about the victims? Who were they? Contrary to popular belief, torture wasn't random. It targeted specific groups: heretics, rebels, witches, and sometimes just the unlucky. During the Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century, entire communities of Cathars in southern France were tortured to root out their heresy. Women in particular faced unique horrors. Accused witches in the later Middle Ages were subjected to methods like the ducking stool, where they were submerged in water to test their guilt. If they floated, they were witches. If they drowned, they were innocent. Either way, they lost. A 15th century trial in Germany describes a woman enduring the stool 3 times before drowning, her accusers unmoved. These stories remind us that torture wasn't just physical. It was deeply gendered and rooted in fear of the other. As we move through this dark history, it's worth asking, how did people live with this? How did a society function when pain was so public? Part of the answer lies in desensitization. Violence was everywhere. War, disease, and short life expectancies made death a constant companion. Torture was just another part of the landscape. But there was also resistance. In 1381, during the Peasants' Revolt in England, rebels targeted judges and sheriffs, burning records of punishments. This wasn't just about taxes. It was a rejection of a system that used pain to oppress. These uprisings show that even in the Middle Ages, people craved justice that felt fair. Let's look at one final method, the strappado. This was deceptively simple, but devastatingly effective. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, and they were hoisted into the air by a rope, often with weights attached to their feet. The shoulders would dislocate and the pain was unbearable. Used widely in Italy and Spain, the strappado was favored because it left no visible marks, making it clean for torturers who wanted confessions without obvious evidence of abuse. A 16th century Venetian trial record describes a merchant enduring the strappado for hours, confessing to fraud he later recanted. The strappado's subtlety made it insidious, a reminder that torture wasn't always about blood. It was about breaking the spirit. As the Middle Ages progressed, torture began to face scrutiny. By the 15th century, the Renaissance was dawning, bringing new ideas about human dignity. Legal reforms in places like France and England started favoring evidence over confessions. The rise of centralized monarchies also reduced the power of local lords to mete out arbitrary punishment. But torture didn't vanish overnight. It lingered into the early modern period, especially during witch hunts and religious wars. The legacy of medieval torture is still with us, not in dungeons but in debates about justice, punishment, and human rights. The methods we've explored, the rack, the Judas Cradle, the breaking wheel, seem distant, but they raise questions we still grapple with. How far should a society go to enforce its laws? Where's the line between justice and cruelty? Let's step back and reflect on what we've uncovered. Medieval torture was more than just violence. It was a system, a mindset, a tool of power. It was shaped by religion, fear, and the need for control in a chaotic world. The devices and methods were ingenious in their cruelty, designed not just to punish but to terrify. Yet, even in that dark time, there were glimmers of resistance, voices questioning whether pain was the path to truth. This history isn't just about the past. It's a mirror for our own values. What do we consider justice today? How do we balance punishment with compassion? If this journey into the shadows of medieval justice has left you shocked, curious, or even a bit unsettled, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, tell me which torture method surprised you most, or what you think about the psychology behind it. And if you found this video eye-opening, hit that like button and share it with a friend who loves diving into the gritty side of history. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Speaking of which, our next video is going to blow your mind. Untold stories of medieval kings, medieval monarchs. We're diving into the scandals, betrayals, and epic reigns that shaped Europe's greatest dynasties. You won't believe what these rulers got away with. See you there.